In this video article, we're going to have an overview of one of my favorite authors, and the author in question is William Goldman. I'm going to recommend you 5 of his books, and I'm also going to tell you for each of those books something, 1 or 2 things that you can use those books to learn from. Before we get started, to get an email with a time-stamped overview of a video every time I release a new video, simply head over to my website, deliberate-practice.com, sign up for my email list. There's other content there, plus there'll be some thank you goodies along the way for signing up. And you'll also find William Goldman did an interview not too long before his death, and that's part of the content that's there, and it's got detailed time-stamped overview notes. So head over to deliberate-practice.com and do that. Let's just have a brief overview of William Bill Goldman. He was often called Bill by all his friends. He started as a literary novelist, and his first few books would be considered literary novels today. And his first book, I think he wrote very quickly. He got a tidy sum of money for in the day, and he started out as a literary novelist. But he side transitioned into screenplays, working with various directors. He wrote a screenplay for one of his literary novels that had been sold to Hollywood. The film rights had been sold, and he got into screenwriting like that. During his screenwriting career, screenwriting is what he's actually most famous for. He won 2 Oscars, Butch Cassidy, All the President's Men, both great films worth seeing. You can go to Wikipedia and you'll see there's loads of other films that he wrote the screenplays for. I think my favorite of his films that he wrote the screenplay for was the adaptation of Stephen King's Misery. Stephen King was definitely influenced by William Goldman, and the pair of them had a very healthy relationship, working relationship. There's a couple of collections of Goldman's screenplays, one of which is Misery. And in the introduction, there's a really funny story about at the screening of Misery for all the people involved, he was sat next to Stephen King, and he basically saying Stephen King couldn't help himself and was giving commentary and telling characters what to do and what not to do. But interesting story, and so the two of them had a working relationship of sorts, but he did lots of screenplays. He continued writing novels, and his first literary agent, I think, passed away in the early 70s, and he signed with a new literary agent, and his work from then became more commercial. He also did some non-fiction books, the 2 most famous ones, Adventures in the Screen Trade, Which Lie Did I Tell? I recommend that you read both of those. And also there's another one called The Big Picture, which is a collection of essays that he wrote for various film magazines in the 90s. He has a really individual and unique non-fiction writing style that's full of character, full of personality, and he always, I find his writing is always entertaining, and I really enjoy it. And in the 2 books that are listed there, Adventures in the Screen Trade and Which Lie Did I Tell?, he talks about stuff to do with writing. So if you are an aspiring fiction writer, as well as reading the fiction books that I'm going to recommend, and I'll give you the reasons why, these 2 books should be on your bookshelf and your reading list as well. What I like about Bill's fiction work, it's really unpredictable. He's really clever at tying things together in a way that makes perfect sense when it ties together, but you would never see coming a mile off. He's also really good at unpredictable transitions. So there's a book which isn't in my list of 5 called The Colour of Light. There's a book with a famous transition where in one paragraph there's a gap of 4 years in that paragraph, and the way he does it is seamless. So he's definitely worth reading for taking apart how he creates this unpredictability and how he makes it logical. He also writes great characters, like really interesting characters who are unique, have great personality, even ordinary characters, inverted commas. He manages to get into them, get into what makes them tick, makes them likable, even if they're flawed, and you you really want to know more about them, and you understand how they act the way that they do. And they're very different. He doesn't write, so like if you take a writer like Lee Child, for example, and Reacher, the cast of characters in all of those novels is very similar. But when you pick up a new Bill Goldman book, or new to you, Bill sadly passed away 5 or 6 years ago, and I think his last fiction book that he wrote was published in the late 80s. So a real shame that he didn't write more. But we should be thankful for the bits we've got. But when you pick up his books, you never know what the characters are going to do, who they are, and even some of the villains. We get chapters in their viewpoint, and we understand why they're acting. So he's a great writer to read for characters in more commercial fiction. He also brings some of his screenwriting tricks to the page, so he does things that other novelists perhaps don't do. Excuse me. And each of the books I recommend, as I said, I'll give you one or two specifics that you can focus on to learn from. So let's start. I was going to do some quotes, and I decided not to, so we'll just skip over that. So we'll go to the first book, The Princess Bride. This is probably what he's most famous for. What you perhaps might not know is that he sold the film rights for this, and the film wasn't made, and he bought them back so that he could control or have more say in the process, because this was his favourite work. This is like a fantasy fairy tale, and it was started out as a story that he told his young daughters, or a series of stories, as they were going to bed, that he was making up and improvising. And there's a really unique structure within the book. So here it says, if you can read on the cover, it says, The Princess Bride, S. Morgenstern's classic tale, true love and high adventure. And the way the book is positioned is that the fictional country in the book was real, and that there was a historian called S. Morgenstern who'd written this detailed but boring history of the events that happened, and he's kind of lampooning books like Les Miserables, where if you've ever tried to read Les Miserables, there's chapters on the sewers and stuff like that. And in 18th, 19th century fiction, you might have a completely expositional chapter and then go back to the story. And there are issues of this called the Good Parts version. And what he does is he prints little bits out of, more in inverted commas, Morgenstern's version, and then he writes his version of the good parts. So it's a really interesting way that the story is framed. And the thing to study is, if you've seen the film, there's the sequence where there's the princess has been kidnapped, and I don't want to give too much away in case you've not read it, you've not seen the film. And the Vicini is the character who's kidnapped the princess, and he has with him two hired help. One is a giant called Fezzik, and one is a swordsman, Inigo Montoya. And they go up a cliff called the Cliffs of Insanity, and the hero is still following them, and Vicini says to the swordsman, you wait till he climbs up. If he doesn't fall, finish him off. And he leaves the giant a bit further along and says, finish him off. And then he's waiting at a table, and the hero has to get through the swordsman with a sword, obviously a sword fight. He has to fight the giant, and then he has to outwit Vicini in a battle of wits to get through the sequence to try and rescue the princess. Each of those scenes is like a mini fight scene with different types of conflict in them. And it will really pay off to study each of those fight scenes. Like the sword fighting scene, for example. I saw the film before I read the book, and I could never envisage how that sword writing sequence could be written in a book. And when I read it, I was like, my eyes were popping out because it was brilliantly written. Never seen anything like it. One of the best fight scenes I've ever seen written. But also, it's funny. It's got great dialogue. This is just the fight scene, and the whole concept of the funny dialogue flows throughout the film. There's a million great quotes you could take from it. If you saw on the previous slide that I skipped over, there was the "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." And "Inconceivable," and all these great lines. I think this is a great book, and the only flaw with it is, if you buy the 25th anniversary edition, Goldman alludes to the sequel, which is called Buttercup's Baby, and the first chapter of that is called Fezzik Dies. And I bought the 25th anniversary edition in hardback. It was a present for someone, and I couldn't bear to be parted from it and kept it. But when I read that, I closed the book, and I've never opened it since, because I cannot foresee how he could have killed Fezzik. And what narrative purpose that would do. And we never got the full sequel of Buttercup's Baby, and I hope that whoever controls the William Goldman estate will never sell those rights, so The Princess Bride is never ruined by a subpar sequel written by someone who's not William Goldman. So this is a great book. You can learn so much from it, but it's really entertaining as well. If you've got children or grandchildren, it's a fabulous book to read to them. So I can't recommend this highly enough. Second book is called Control. Now, this is a psychological thriller, and the concept for the thriller is trying to control the future by controlling the past. That's all I'm going to tell you about the book, except it follows a number of really interesting characters who are going through various things in their lives, and it's what is interesting is how all the characters come together and how the story makes perfect sense when you get to the end, and there's some reveals that come out of nowhere that you should have seen, and you kick yourself when you should have seen them. The study, though, for this book is how to use unusual typography to visually control the reader. Now, I'm not going to go into how you do that, because that would make this video way too long, and I already have people commenting on videos saying I could make them shorter and more concise. But if you've ever read much Stephen King, you'll know he's quite funky with his typography. I think it was all learned from William Goldman. He's a master at doing unusual things with words to either control the reader's interpretation of what's happening or to control their pace. So if you pick this, you should pick this book up, and don't get a Kindle copy. Get a probably you have to get a second-hand copy. They're pretty cheap on Amazon, so you've actually got the book in front of you, so you can see it and then try and reverse engineer what he's doing. If you've ever got anything in your book where there's some kind of altered state for a character, whether they've been drugged, whether they've been hit on the head, and they're suffering from like concussive shock, these effects are fantastic for displaying that and communicating that to the reader in a way that will be trippy for them as well. So it's not just, you've got to read the book to see what I mean, but it's a masterclass in how to do this. So highly recommended, and it's also actually a great book. I'm going on holiday at some stage in the near future, and this is one of the books that is in my holiday bag already packed. My wife is groaning at the size of it's getting with all the books. I'm going, I want to reread that. Oh, and that one too, and that one. I'm not a great fan of beach holidays or holidays in the sun, but there's nothing I love more than having no phone, being sat somewhere, not being bothered by anyone, and just reading. So Control is on my reading list for my holiday. Magic. This is the third book I'm going to recommend. Now, Magic is another psychological thriller. This is slightly different. It follows the main character is a guy called Corky, who's kind of likable, but he's got flaws, and he's a magician, and he's not a very good one. And what happens is he introduces a foul-mouthed ventriloquist dummy called Fats into his act, and suddenly he starts to take off and become a superstar. That's all I'm going to tell you about it, other than you should read it. But the study in this book is dialogue. The dialogue, so we get Fats's dialogue, so you know it's Fats, and again, Goldman uses a specific visual typographic technique, so we know when Fats is speaking, and Fats is a sassy, foul-mouthed character. He's a really interesting character in and of himself, and I don't want to say much more about the book than that, other than it's unpredictable. The twists at the end, there's a couple of them. When you get to them, you go, of course I should have seen that coming, but you never did, because they were so well set up. But the dialogue is what to study in this, and especially Fats. He is the star of the book, in my opinion, and you can learn a lot about dialogue and how dialogue works to move a story forward by studying this book. Although I will say that the dialogue in all of Bill's books is great, and you can get great. I mean, even in The Princess Bride, which is a very different style of book, and the dialogue is very different, it's still fabulous. And he's a master at using dialogue to move stories along. So you should, if nothing else, you should pick up at least one of these books just for the dialogue. The next book I'm going to recommend in the UK was called Edged Weapons, but in America, when it was originally released, it was called Heat. I've no idea why Bill's UK publisher changed the name to Edge Weapons. I think Heat probably works better, but it's another interesting book. This is a thriller set in Las Vegas, and the study in this book, so it's about a freelance chaperone called Nick Escalante, I think, who's also the #1 master of edge weapons in the world, and he gets into all sorts of interesting scrapes. And the thing to study, there's a character sequence where the main character gambles all his money away, and I can't say any more than that. I've already given too much away. But the way that sequence is written, it makes it so plausible to you, the reader. You understand absolutely. You never go, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you spending this money that you want to give you 5 years of freedom? What are you doing? But the way it's written, the relentless way it's written, it makes total and utter story logical sense. So read this book for that sequence, a fabulous sequence. Also, the fight scenes are really cool in this book as well, and they're written in a very cinematic way. Of course, Bill Goldman was a screenwriter, so no surprises there. So you can study those as well to add to the fight scenes from The Princess Bride. There's also a great fight scene in Control as well, on the top of an apartment block in New York. Again, Bill writes great fight scenes. So if you did nothing else but study the fight scenes and the dialogue, learn from them, implemented a study plan so that you were able to write in a similar vein, you'd be streets ahead of all your contemporaries, because not many people will do that. The last book I'm going to recommend, and I ummed and ahed between this one and Marathon Man. I thought about The Colour of Light too, and if you get into Bill's work and you like it, you should read those other books. Marathon Man, the torture scene in The Dentist is fabulous, and there's a great story in one of Bill's I think Adventures in the Screen Trade, where he's talking about he used to write, he had an apartment in a building, and he used to go to that apartment to write, and he was writing Marathon Man, and the way he did the dialogue for Marathon Man was he would pace around his office and talk about it, And he said the day that he wrote the dialogue for the dentist scene, if you've seen the film, you remember with Dustin Hoffman, and the question he's being asked is it safe, and what happens, and how he's trying, the antagonist is trying to get information out of Dustin Hoffman. And he said when he came out of the room, there was the lady from next door was waiting, and she said, "I know what you're doing. I'm phoning the police," because she obviously heard him walking up and down and acting out the dialogue. So it's worth reading Adventures in the Screen Trade and What Lie Did I Tell for those little anecdotes as well. But Tinsel is quite a different story. It's more of it's not normally a story that I would read, and I read it because it was Bill's. It's basically a story about how women are treated in Hollywood, and the answer is that is not very well. The reason I've recommended this over the other two is, just like in Edge Weapons, there's a character sequence that's worth reading where the main character is anorexic, and you read it and it takes you, it propels you through it, and you understand totally what the character's doing. And just as in the sequence I mentioned for Edge Weapons, you never think, stop, what are you doing? You're just taken along by the inexorable character logic of why this character is doing this thing, and seeing the effects. And he uses, all I'll say is he uses numbers as a great way of punctuating this sequence. So you need to read the book for this sequence, but it's an interesting book. And then the one other thing that in it is there's a great misdirection in it. About halfway through the book, something happens, and the character who finds out this thing assumes that another character is acting in a certain way, and then at the end of the story they find out that, so we find out and that character finds out that his assumption was wrong all the way through, and it's suddenly basically something that screws him up really badly. Very small piece of plot trickery, but when you read it, if you go, it's something worth thinking about adding to your toolbox of tricks and techniques. Very clever. So hopefully you'll pick up at least one of these books. All of them are worth buying to read, and there's things that you can learn from Bill's writing. I don't know why these books aren't perpetual and perennial bestsellers, because they're all a substantial rung above most of what's being written in the contemporary book world. All I can say is buy one or more of them and make your own mind up on whether I'm over-egging the case or whether I'm actually right. I think I'm actually right. Of course I would, but I'd be interested in what you guys think. Okay, in the next episode in this mini-series, we're going to be looking at my third choice of a favourite author. That's going to be thriller writer John Samford. He has a series called the Prey series. Fabulous writer. If you've got any questions, queries, comments, drop me an email, paul@deliberate-practice.com. Don't forget to go to deliberate-practice.com and sign up to the email list. And I've also got a resource that I'm putting together for aspiring and frustrated fiction writers. It's called thewriting-vault.com. Link will be in the description below this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope more that you go out and buy one or more of these Bill Goldman books, because they're all fabulous books. If you've never read him before, I envy you the joy of opening one of his books and sinking into it and getting lost in his writing. Very, very underrated writer, in my opinion, and also a writer you can learn a hell of a lot from. Okay, thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in the next video.